This is insane. Just take a look at this game, okay? So we have the Nimzo position, okay? And look at what white does here. Pawn move, pawn move, pawn move, pawn move, pawn move, pawn move, pawn move. Uh, yeah, Jan with the white pieces maybe just forgot how his other pieces move, but he just played some 10 pawn moves in a row, aside from the insertion of knight c3 very early on. So this is a game we're going to look at. It was insane, especially coming from round 2 yesterday with 5 draws. This decisive result and an incredibly aggressive and insane game definitely was fun to look at. So let's dive straight in. This is Jan with the white side, Anish Giri with the black pieces, and like I said, the Nimzo, and he doesn't treat this like a normal Nimzo, and I think Anish was definitely surprised. Okay, he plays e3, this is very typical, and a3, okay, somewhat interesting to combine those, but then he plays f3, and this is already very strange, already somewhat novel. More typical is just to start getting your pieces out, right? At some point, that's a requirement, or at least people thought, but Jan had different plans for this game. He played f3, and then he played e4. Okay, and he established a monster center, but he doesn't really have pieces supporting it, and black is doing okay here based off of that fact. But he kept going, right? He was not phased. He went h4 and then h5. And his intention is clear, and it's not a very nice intention. He wants to go and just ram these pawns forward, and that's what happens. He very quickly goes for g4 and g5, and this is a really interesting and fascinating approach to play because on one hand, it's clear that your pieces are going to have some answers that they're going to have to give to some very hard questions. How are they going to get out? It doesn't seem very obvious, but Jan handles these pieces incredibly masterfully. So I just want to show what he does. So first of all, as it relates to the bishop on f1, it ends up getting traded on c4. As it relates to the bishop on c1, it sits there on c1 for a second while it aims at h6, and that's all that it needs to do right now, right? This is the clear kingside attack that it's going for. The rook on a1 gets into the game very quickly via this sliding maneuver, and it's so rare to go for this so quickly because usually you have pawns on the second rank, but Jan has practically none of those because he pushed them all. So rook a2 and then sliding over to g2 is what the rook on a1 is going for. The queen is also kind of sitting for a little bit until it can strike later in the game on the king side. The rook is clearly the only active piece in the game, and the knight is also kind of going to be more of a defensive piece. And miraculously, Jan has not touched any piece aside from one knight on move 3, and yet every piece has a purpose, and a pretty solid purpose. There's somehow a harmonious piece developing scheme that he can go for, and it just strikes me as incredibly instructive, incredibly unintuitive, and I think this is, there's something here that's really interesting to explore because this is not the way that chess is typically played, and yet it works perfectly. And I think it's a very specific piece coordination where this works. Black is going for a fairly passive setup, and therefore maybe white can get away with playing like this. It might not work against other setups, but somehow, it works perfectly here. So let's take a look. Bishop a6, like I said, the bishop is going to give itself up on c4. So white is sacrificing the pawn on c4, but by doing so, he's actually relieving himself of an extra piece that's kind of a dead weight on f1. It can't really get into the game because of the developing scheme. And by the way, I hope you noticed another pawn move, g4, was played, and this maneuver with rook a1 to a2 to g2 was also played, and somehow both of the rooks are on the g and h files. The bishop, again, is perfectly placed because on the first rank, it's not interfering in any of the rook coordination, which it typically does. And on the contrary, it has, again, a very specific purpose, attacking h6, and that becomes very important very soon when these pawns continue rolling. And once again, sort of the only questions then become relating to the queen and the knight on d1 and g1 respectively. And these pieces kind of wait a little bit. They're more of the defensive pieces. The knight ends up, you'll see, coming to e2, where it holds the king on e1, which is obviously not castling. It holds that king quite safe. It controls the c3 square and some of the other checking squares like g3. And again, the pieces work together. Insane. I would not want to be black here because your opponent's doing everything they're not supposed to do, and yet there's no clear way to break through. And I want to be clear, objectively, black is slightly better, but they have to be super precise. So, as I said, the knight comes to e2. It holds together sort of a fortress with the king in very nice safety, actually, on e1. The knight comes to d7 and g5, right? Jan is simply pushing. It's a very easy game plan as well. That's another benefit. There isn't many candidate moves to consider. You just want to get an attack on the king. And it's funny because the king on e1 might seem a little unsafe, but Jan is hoping, and his point with this play is that he's going to make the king on g8 feel even less safe. Okay, e5, at some point black does want to break. G6, and here was the kind of key mistake. What black should have gone for, and I don't blame Anish for not going for this because it's hard to see, h6 here is the correct move. And again, you're just looking at this going, what? Doesn't this invite bishop takes h6? This was the whole purpose of the bishop sitting on c1. But the engine, fearless, goes right into this, and after queen c1 renewing the threat on the diagonal towards h6, the king simply comes to g7, and the engine, yeah, again, no fear whatsoever. He's saying, I'm surviving this as black, and gives actually a decent advantage to the black king that's going to slowly run away via e8 to the queen side. So black would be better here, and this is what Anish should have gone for objectively, but practically it's difficult to invite such a sacrifice on h6, justifying the play for white. And what he played instead of h6 was f takes g6, but unfortunately, this simply opens up the entire rook on h1. It also soon will open up the rook on g2. It opens files too quickly, and unlike the previous variation where the files did open up, but the king could escape, here the king's not going anywhere. And so the king is going to be a constant threat that Anish is going to have to defend. Rook takes f3, and we take on h7, and again, the king cannot, it doesn't have the luxury to run to the queen side because the pawn's going to promote. It has to have sort of a strange defense of the pawn on h8, and it's just guarding the promotion square. But now white gets a lot of play, and white is already back into the game, and white has clear initiative. It's possible that white's already better here. After rook f7, though, white found, Jan Nepomniachtchi had a stunning move here, bishop to h6. This is brilliant, and again, the bishop on c1 seemed very stupid for the entire opening stage, but it comes to life on this h6 square where it serves an incredible purpose because it's targeting g7, an undefendable pawn. You have to take it, but then the rook comes to g8, and after the king takes h7, you can't take, obviously, because you promote with mate, so the king takes the other pawn as opposed to taking the rook, and now rook takes on a8, and white is actually winning an exchange here. Okay, they're a couple pawns down, but more importantly than probably any of those material considerations is the king's safety. The king on h7 is simply a sitting duck, and well, Jan goes about attacking the sitting duck in very precise way. So black had a final opportunity to hold everything together here in a couple of ways. So for example, queen c6 was possible to try to hold together on some of the light squares, and also you're attacking the central square on e4. An alternative, which I think also is quite strong, is this move knight f8, and you're simply trying to claim that the rook in the corner is kind of stuck and broken away from civilization. That would have also given black good chances to draw, but unfortunately Anish made the losing move here. Knight f6. Okay, centralizing the knight, it seems natural, but it invites a capture on e5, which is deadly, because when the board opens up, which king is more unsafe? And again, largely because of the knight on e2, which miraculously, again, holds together some of the checking squares on c3 and g3, it's actually the black king that is feeling more under pressure here. So we take on e5 as white, and here Jan finished the game in very good style. Insanely, the best move for black is to retreat with the knight to d7, but okay, no one's ever going to do that. You just came from that square. Of course, you're going to have to take the pawn in the center. It was objectively probably better to take with the queen, and it also poses a very important practical question, because the line would continue pawn takes knight, queen takes rook in the corner, and here Jan only has one specific move to win, and it's not giving any of the natural checks on b1, c2, or d3. It's actually moving the queen to a4. And this seems insane, and I don't know if Jan would have found it. This would have been definitely what Anish Giri should have gone for, posing this question. But the entire point is that The queen on a8 is what white is playing against. The queen now doesn't have this check, or it doesn't have the square on e8. It does not have the square on e4. And this queen is very much dominating its counterpart. And the second that the queen moves to any other square, to b8 or c8 or whatever, d8, the queen's going to be able to come in and shine via e4 and then come to g6. And, the entire king side begins to collapse. So queen a4 was the path forward in this variation where you take the pawn with the queen, but Anish kind of made Jan's life a little easier. He took the pawn with the knight, but now a nice move, queen c1. Okay, you still had to find this nice move, but I think it's quite intuitive. You want to get the queen to the nice diagonal to attack the king, and you might be wondering, what is the threat here? Guys, there's a pretty serious threat. If black plays a random move, rook h8 is the brilliancy. And after king takes, queen takes h6, the queen comes to life. And what a life it will live after mating the opponent's king on g8. So queen c1, deadly threat with rook h8 and queen h6. And so black defends in maybe the only possible way, knight to g5, but now we just take that knight. I mean, at this point, the entire position is cracked open. Black is totally losing. We take the knight. If you take back, then the queen's going to be able to activate, and the king won't stand really much of a chance. And again, I point out that the knight on e2 serves perhaps the most important role because it enables all the other pieces to attack the opposing king while it sits down sort of in the sideline and defends, holds down the fort on the opposing end. It's an incredible piece harmony here with the rook on a8, with the queen on c1, with the knight on e2. I mean, somehow everything's working together. So you can't take this queen gave the check, trying to win the rook under better circumstances, but the rook now saves itself. And aside from simply having somewhat material equality, that's not what's important, because after queen c2, queen g6, the entire king side collapses, and the king, in fact, collapses as well. There's no way to hold everything together. Okay, queen f8 was tried in the game, but after e6, the final piece of the puzzle, the rook has to move, but now we attack h6, force the rook to the h file, and then we attack the f file, and the queen is sort of a big target here. In the game, Anish played a couple more moves. He brought the queen to d8, but rook f7, and after takes, queen to f8, queen to f6 check, king to h7, and knight f4. Anish resigned because of the clear threat after a random move of knight e6. And the queen's hit, but if the queen moves too far, then there's mate. You could also take the queen there, but mate is even prettier. And yeah, white totally wins. It's actually just a mating attack. So that was a mouthful. I think it was an incredible game. I hope you appreciate what we just saw in round 3 of the Sinquefield Cup as much as I did, because it just totally broke my understanding of this game. I think this is one of the instructive games that can definitely go into books because it breaks every principle, right? You're not developing, you're moving pawns, you're weakening your king, and yet it works perfectly. And again, the reason it works perfectly is because in this specific situation where you're going for this, every piece somehow does find a nice home. Again, brilliant game. Definitely can go into books. Definitely deserving of some applause. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new around here. Like this video if you learned something from it. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.